Hello everybody, welcome to the I Am IT Geek YouTube channel. My name is Shabazz Dart and as ever I am the IT Geek. Welcome back to another AZ700 Designing and Implementing Microsoft Azure Network Solutions episode. As I mentioned last episode, we started Module 4, it's a final module. So you're not going to see me and Mohammed Sajid for a while after that. But yeah, it's a final module, and we started the first topic of that module in last episode. Again, same format, myself doing the theory, Mohammed Sajid doing the lab. So let's get started with this episode. So as we mentioned, this is designing and implementing private access to Azure services, which is module 4, and we're on the second part of the Azure Private Link service and Private Endpoints topic. So today we're going to talk about configuring access to Azure resources by using a private endpoint. We'll then touch on that connectivity to your on-premises and how that's managed. And we'll finally finish it off by looking at sort of DNS integration with private endpoints. And I'll hand over to Mohammed Sajid to bring it home with another cracking demo, this time creating private endpoints demo. So let's talk about configuring access to resources by using private endpoints. You can use private endpoints for your Azure storage accounts to allow clients on your virtual networks, aka VNets, to securely access data over that private link. And you use private endpoints for your storage accounts to enable you to secure your storage accounts by configuring the storage firewall, and that blocks connections on that public endpoint for that storage service. You can also increase security for that virtual network by enabling you to block exfiltration of data from the VNet itself. And again, we're going to touch on this topic in a bit more detail, but you can secure connectivity to storage accounts from your on-premises networks and that connect through your sort of a VPN express route connectivity. Let's keep on with this topic around Azure resources and private endpoints. When you create that private endpoint, the DNS CNAME resource record for your storage account is updated to an alias to a subdomain with the prefix private link. So we're going to talk about DNS in a bit more shortly. And by default, it also creates a private DNS zone corresponding to that private link subdomain with a DNS a resource record for that private endpoint. And when you resolve the storage and storage account endpoint URL from outside the virtual network with the private endpoint, it resolves to the public endpoint of the storage service as well. Like anything, there are a few constraints, and you need to keep in mind a few of those as well when you are doing the exam. So you can copy blobs between storage accounts by using private endpoints only if you're using the REST API, the Azure REST API, or tools that you use as you use the REST API. So they'll include like AZ Copy, Storage Explorer, PowerShell, CLI, and the actual Azure Blob Storage SDKs. Only private endpoints that target the blob storage resource are supported. So private endpoints that target the data lake storage Gen 2, for example, or your file resources, they're not supported. And also one thing to remember is when you're copying between storage accounts by using the NFS protocol, this is also not supported as well. Lastly, keep in mind that clients, that are using VNets with existing private endpoints may face some constraints when accessing sort of other storage accounts that do have private endpoints. So let's move on to talking about the on-premises connectivity. So private endpoints enable traffic from on-premises to access private link resources without public peering or needing to traverse the internet. I think I've mentioned a few of these already, but you can fully integrate with multiple connection types, including site-type VPN tunnels and that express route private peering. So you need these in place to integrate with that private endpoint, and that allows it to sort of not traverse the public internet. Before we hand over to Mohammed Sajid, I just want to focus on a bit more detail around DNS. I've touched on a bit of DNS already when it comes to private endpoints. But the first thing, the network interface associated with the private endpoint contains that information to configure your DNS. And the network interface information includes a fully qualified domain name or FQDN and private IP address for your private link resource. And you can use any of the following options to configure your DNS settings for your private endpoint. So you could use the host file, which is only really recommended for testing. You know, it's a bit dirty, so I don't recommend using it. And you can use the host file on a virtual machine to override DNS locally. You can use private DNS zones. So you can use private DNS zones to override the DNS resolution for a private endpoint. Private DNS can be linked to your virtual network to resolve specific domains. Finally, you can use DNS folder. Now this is optional. DNS folder is optional, so you can use DNS folders to override DNS resolution for a private link resource, and you create a DNS forwarding rule to use private DNS zone on your DNS server hosted on your virtual network. So that's enough from me now. So coming towards the end of this topic, I'm going to hand it over to Mohammed Sajid, who is going to now do a lab on creating a private endpoint. Over to you, Saj.
Thank you, Shabazz. Hi, everyone. So in our previous demo, we created a private endpoint. And we created a private link service. In this demo, we're going to take a look at private endpoints. Just quickly go over something. So within your private link service, you can create an endpoint within your private link service. So if you select one that you already deployed as part of our last demo, you have setting up create private endpoint connection. We'll take a look at that in a moment. The other thing you can do is create a private endpoint. Well, we'll come work a look at that as well. So if you're going to create a private endpoint within your private link service, because when you deploy the service, it just deploys the service for you without private endpoint connection. So under settings, private endpoint connection, create an endpoint. So private endpoint connection, give it a name, your subscription, select a resource group. So select a demo resource group, give it a name. Quickly give it a name. For the network interface, we'll type and make up the end of it. The region you want to deploy it in. So we're deploying everything in UK South region. The resource, there's nothing to configure here because it's part of the private link service. It shows that here. Define your virtual networks, your VNet, your subnet within the virtual network. Do private endpoint. To deploy the private endpoint, select a virtual network subnet. So again, if you've got multiple ones, select multiple ones, or select the one that you want to use. From the drop-down menu, define your subnet, whether it's going to be private IP address configuration or static, whether you want to integrate it with the application security group, create a new ASG, or use an existing one. Leave this as default for this demo. Again, DNS integration. So within your private link service, your private endpoint connection does not integrate with private DNS. So this is grayed out. There's nothing to configure here. Tags, define tags if you use them within your environment. And if you're happy for your options, review and create. To create a private endpoint, from the navigation menu, select private endpoint and create a new private endpoint. So if you look here, this private endpoint is created as part of the private link service that already exists. So you've got private endpoint here. If you select this, it shows you private link service. So we'll create a new private endpoint here outside of the private link service. Select your resource group. We select a demo resource group. We're going to give it a name, AC700 demo private endpoint 002. Again, from the network interface, it will tag Nick at the end of it. For the region, we're using the UK South region as part of this demo. Select the appropriate region for yourself. On the resource group, select IAM resource subscription and define your resource type. So here you have lots of options within Azure. Batch accounts, service accounts, Redis. If you look at servers, that's another example. Right. You can search here for them. You've got various SQL servers that you can define as your resource. You've got storage accounts. You can work and configure this as part of this demo. You've got a key vault. So if you look at the key vault as an example, select resource, which is your key vault, and subtype, which is your vault. Define your virtual network. So define deployment network, select a virtual network subnet. So select your VNet that you want to utilize, the subnet within that VNet. And again, private IP address configuration, dynamic or static. And if you want to integrate with the ASG pre-existing or create a new one. So we'll leave it as default for now. And unlike private link service, this will integrate within your private DNS zones or define your own record within your own DNS service. We'll leave this as default for now. Review and create. So if you just step back for a moment, we'll create this as part of our storage account because we have some demo storage accounts created. Like the resource, which is here, our demo storage account. select the resource type. So you've got blob, table, queue, file, web, DFS. We'll just look blob for this example. We leave the virtual network settings as part of our default VNet that we're utilizing, and leave the subnet as it is. Dynamic IP address can stay as part of this example. We got the option for static. We won't configure an ASG, and DNS we won't integrate with the private DNS. So in this example, if you need to, you can. We're not using any tags within the demo environment. We can define your tags here. To view your configuration, once you're happy, select create. This will take a moment to deploy. If it takes too long, I'll hand it back to Shabazz for the next demo. But once you've created, you can go back to your private link service and your endpoint will appear in here once it's created. Thank you for watching. Back to you, Shabazz.
Thank you, Saj. Again, another really informative lab there. So just give you an idea of how to create a private endpoint, really. So that concludes this topic and concludes what is now must be close to 30 episodes in. A link to the GitHub Labs is in the description. A link to my socials, a link to Mohammed Sajid's socials. Ping us on LinkedIn if you've got any questions. We're really overwhelmed by the feedback. Please continue to give us feedback. We're not perfect. I'm not perfect. Mohammed Sajid isn't. So we're doing this to help people. So if there's anything you feel that we can do more of to help or do less of to help, there's a topic we might not have covered that you want more information on, or there's a topic we have covered that you would like more information on, please do let us know. So yeah, thank you everybody for watching, and until next time, goodbye.